If you're an online coach and things are working, you've got clients, you're posting content, you're having conversations, you're somewhere around that 5k to 15k a month mark, but growth still feels fragile, this is for you. Because from the outside, everything seems okay. Your content's going out, you're having a sales call here and there, and you're signing some clients occasionally, but it doesn't feel repeatable. Some weeks it works, some weeks it doesn't, and the hardest part is you can't clearly explain why. And this uncertainty turns into pressure. You hesitate on decisions you should be confident in. You delay leverage you know you will eventually need. And you invest time or money into things without any real conviction behind it. This all isn't because you're lazy. It's not because you don't have motivation. But ultimately, it stems down to one key thing. And that's because you're guessing. And when your business is built on guessing, scaling always feels like something could break. And this ultimately isn't a mindset problem. It's an operator problem. Something that trickles into every facet of the business, whether you like it or not. The real issue isn't effort. It's not discipline. It's not just wanting it more than your other coach. It's knowing how to grow without second guessing everything. And at a certain point, your coaching offer has to be treated like a real business, not just something you push harder on for the sake of it. One of the biggest things I see that most fitness coaching businesses struggle with, but even other service-based business providers, is they build things out of sequence. And what do I mean by this? Some examples of this are people jump to scaling before they understand what's working. People chase the perfect system before their offer's actually converting. And they ultimately add leverage before they have the skills or the judgment to do it themselves first. So instead of piling on the secret hack that's gonna 10x your growth, I'm going to walk you through the exact 4 stages that every sustainable coaching business needs to go through in order to actually grow sustainably and without any guesswork to allow you to hit anywhere between $10,000 and $30,000 a month. And these 4 stages are clarity, validation, skills and systems, and leverage. But just to reassure everyone, I'm not going to gatekeep everything. I'm going to go and walk through each single stage on my laptop in just a moment. So without further ado, I'll go and see you on the laptop. Alrighty everyone, as mentioned, I'm going to be going through the 4 stages of sustainable growth to help you get from obviously where you are now to where you want to be, which as we mentioned was 10 to 30k a month, consistently, predictably, and without any guesswork. So the 4 stages that I mentioned were clarity, validation, skills and system, and leverage, and then essentially explain why they're all important. So without further ado, let's get right into it. So the first stage, as I mentioned, was clarity. And the reason why clarity is the first stage and arguably one of the most important is because before scaling, before sales, or before any leverage, we need clarity. And most people think that clarity is getting clearer on a niche or an outcome, but this actual clarity is actually understanding the human behind the purchase in themselves. So who they actually are, what pressure they're under, what they've already tried, and ultimately what's actually finally making them bite the bullet and wanting to change their life through health, through fitness, or through what solution you're selling online. Clarity isn't your demographics, it's those emotional truths. And when this is vague, content ends up being generic, offers don't end up converting, and then sales feel forced overall. However though, when your clarity is on point and when it's correct, your messaging will resonate hard in content, but in your marketing overall, your offer will begin to convert, and then sales will ultimately feel aligned, especially at a high ticket price point. But you guys are probably asking a very, very valid question, and that is, how do we even gain clarity in the first place? And the way we actually do this is by building an ICP, which essentially just stands for an ideal client profile. So exactly who you want to serve, what pain they go through, what desires they have, and what deep emotional truths that they ultimately come to face with that they want to change with in obviously building a new identity. So we need to build an ICP in order to actually do this effectively. But how do we actually do this? Well, we actually implement what I've kind of coined as a term, but it's essentially called the profitability triad. And it consists of the heart, skill, on the wallet framework. And the reason we need to use these 3 is because without these 3 and without a mix of them all, it's going to be very, very hard to actually build an ICP that's resonant with you, but also alongside this, are able to, actually, afford the price point you want to charge to scale effectively, efficiently, but also sustainably over time. So the first is obviously heart, okay? And what this actually means is that we have deep empathy with this individual if we've lived through firsthand their struggles or secondhand to their struggles. So whether you've actually lived through it or ultimately feel called to helping them through whatever struggles they may be. Now the heart is really important, and as an example, you'll actually go and see in my story a little bit later in the video why I'm actually doing everything that I'm doing and why I'm trying to help you all. So that'll give you a good understanding of the heart section, just as an example. The next is obviously skill. So what this actually means is that you actually have the skills to deliver tangible transformation for the actual ICP specifically, versus just obviously not fulfilling those promises and obviously just giving vague promises or outcomes in themselves. And alongside this, a pretty important one as well is obviously wallet, right? So essentially making sure they actually value your coaching and can afford your solution. There's too many times and too many ICPs, I've gone through it myself, where I've gone and mapped out my full ICP document, but I've realized that later on down the track, I've capped myself at the demographic that I'm charging within the ICP. And because I was able to, translate the same psychographics, struggles, desires that specific ICP had to an older demographic, was only when I was able to actually charge what I really wanted to charge. So applying the profitability triad is super, super important in order to actually go ahead and do this. But to help you guys even further, to help you build your ICP in a bit more detail using the profitability triad, I'm actually going to go and give you guys this ChatGPT prompt in order to actually do so. So essentially what you need to do is make sure that you go and explain your profitability triad personal to you, with obviously the heart, the skill, the wallet framework that we obviously emphasized. I would suggest doing this as you speaking to ChatGPT, you making a voice memo or whatever it is, and putting it all in a transcript. So this way, when you do upload it into ChatGPT with the rest of the prompt obviously further down, you're able to actually go and build an emotionally resonant ICP that's non-generic, that you can actually help serve at a deeper level, and also are able to actually afford your solution. But if you guys want me to send this to you directly, DM me prompt on Insta and I'll go ahead and send it over. But guys, that is essentially as the first stage, and obviously the importance of it. Alongside this, once you have your ICP, this essentially, it helps you with your messaging in terms of your marketing. It helps you with your sales and how to actually bridge value to them. It teaches you how to build your offer so that way they can actually perceive value the way they want to view it, and also aligns the buying psychology to that individual. So that way you know exactly how to actually sell to them specifically. So a bunch of different things that come as a result of getting clarity on who you're serving, why you're serving them, and how you serve them from the beginning by building that ICP. Now on to the next one, which is validation. So once we have clarity and once we have our ICP and have built our offers and we've essentially got our marketing strategy and we know the buying psychology for that specific individual, the next question isn't necessarily how do I actually scale this further? It's actually how do I start getting this to convert consistently in real conversations? Because validation isn't necessarily about confidence. It's all about repetition, right? To actually validate everything that we're doing in the first place to see if it actually is working and it's resonating with the market. So essentially the big questions we need to ask ourselves are: 1, are we actually attracting our ICP through our messaging? 2, does the ICP understand our value in the DMs, but also on the calls? 3, are we actually getting book calls in the first place? And 4, are we closing, right? Pretty standard questions, but really, really important to actually know whether or not we're actually validating the offer as best we physically possibly can. But alongside this, I'm going to give you guys KPIs, but also key things to note for, and whether or not our marketing, sales, offer, everything specifically is actually being validated. So without further ado, I'll go and show you guys those KPIs now. So the first thing we need to take into account, like we said, are we actually attracting the right people? And the KPIs to make sure that we're actually doing this effectively are that 70% of total leads, so that's obviously inbound and outbound combined, match our ICP. If it's less than 30%, then obviously we're completely doing something wrong in our messaging and our marketing. Alongside this, we want our DMs to reflect our positioning. So essentially people in the DMs saying things that you talk about in your content, or things that or pain points that you actually want the ICP to talk about. Like I said as well, prospects referencing specific content that you post, that it resonates with them. And then obviously alongside this, that you're not constantly explaining what you do. So it's easy to actually make sure you are obviously attracting the right ICP or attracting the right person in themselves. Secondly, messaging clarity validation. So can our prospects actually repeat back your value back to you? So the KPIs that we want to hit here are that prospects can articulate their problem clearly on the call. They understand your mechanism before you even pitch. The same objections are actually coming up between call to call, which is actually a good sign. And that ultimately you're not convincing them and you're just clarifying with them when they're actually hopping on the phone or when you're in the DMs essentially. The third is booking and then show rate validation. So essentially, are we converting conversations into real opportunities to actually impact and help as many people as we physically possibly can? So the KPIs for this are 30 to 50% of qualified conversations end up moving to book calls. And then ultimately we want a 70% plus show rate at minimum to make sure that we're actually maximizing any opportunities. And if obviously he's sitting at a 10 to 15% no-show rate, that's something that we potentially need to look at from a messaging standpoint. But even more importantly, which I'll talk about in the next stage, is obviously whether or not our appointment setting skills and those systems are up to scratch as best they physically possibly could. So the fourth is close rate validation. And this is obviously a big one. I'm basing these KPIs on qualified leads only. So we ultimately want a 40 to 60% close rate on a validated offer. If we're closing at over 60% consistently, our pricing is too low. And if we're under 40%, we have to look at our sales skill, pricing, or whether or not it's actually an ICP or like positioning issue overall. So those are the things when it comes to close rate. The next is objection pattern validation. So like I obviously mentioned earlier, if we're getting similar objections across the board, that's actually not necessarily a bad thing, but good objections kind of look like this. So obviously timing, logistics, cash flow timing, and implementation concerns, but bad objections, and these really come down to a skills and systems point of view, like we're obviously going to talk about as well. The next stage is, I need to think about it. I don't know what this actually includes. I don't get how this works. Or another one is, I don't believe this can actually help me get to where I want to be. If you're getting those objections on call, you need to obviously have a look and think about your sales process essentially. And the last one is time to close validation. So essentially from the time that you pitch to closing, in most cases for obviously the offers that you're on at the 1 to 5K price point, it should most likely take 1 to 2 calls max, which with obviously minimal chasing and a decision within 7 days. But long sales cycles at that 1K to 5K price point obviously just leads to uncertainty. And we really, really need to make sure that we are doing the best job we can physically possible throughout the sales process. So that way we're optimizing for that. That actually leads us quite well to the next stage, which is skills and systems. So I'll explain why having the right skills and the right systems in place to even make sure we can validate everything in the first place is super, super integral. It's very, very integral. So as I mentioned, skills and systems are naturally the next step in terms of the 4 stages. However, though, if our skills and systems aren't up to scratch, specifically skills, then we can't really validate the offer properly at all. This is ultimately where most people get it backwards. They try and build systems before they've actually mastered the skills that those systems rely on, which make it harder to actually validate whether or not we're doing is actually good or not. And essentially without these 4 fundamental skills, which I'll obviously list in just a moment, you're pretty much shooting yourself in the foot to actually make sure we can even validate your offer to know if we can grow, can scale sustainably. And these 4 are 1, marketing accurately to the ICP and their pain points, desires, etc. 2, appointment setting. 3, sales, and 4, fulfillment. They are pretty much the bare bones of any business, but if we don't do these well, we're not going to grow and scale effectively and efficiently, but also more importantly, without breaking everything in the first place. So, and like I said, when this is done properly, this is where 10 to 30K a month stops feeling fragile and actually starts feeling more sustainable. Heck, not even 10 to $30,000 a month, even 30, 40, 50, 60, wherever it may be. When these 4 things are done properly at any stage of business is where things actually stop feeling fragile in themselves. However, the issue is, and I'm going to call myself out specifically because I thought I was better at these 4 things than I actually was. And I'm sure you guys potentially may think the same thing too. However, these essentially were the 4 main questions I had to ask myself to actually realize that I maybe wasn't actually as good as these things as I thought I was. And if I couldn't answer these questions honestly and with genuine conviction was when I realized I needed to actually make a change and work on the fundamentals and get better at the fundamentals overall. And these 4 were, if I can't sell in a $1,000 coaching program upfront, am I actually good at sales? If I'm losing leads because they're not replying, am I building enough urgency for them to book a call consistently? If I can't post content that looks good and attracts my ICP, is there any point making it? And if I'm not delivering on the results I promise on and more people are leaving than staying, am I actually good at what I do? These 4 questions are pretty confronting, but ones I genuinely had to honestly answer for myself. And the reality is I couldn't do all these things. So I really had to work hard on these things before I even thought about scaling, ads, growth, delegation, any of that specifically. And it wasn't until I got these things sorted was when I actually started to grow. There was no secret hack or means of scaling that was actually going to work because I couldn't confidently answer those 4 things genuinely. However though, once those skills are up to scratch and you are there, here are some of the systems that we need in order to actually do these things consistently over time. So that way we can actually build things predictably, sustainably, so you can get to 10 to 30K a month without guesswork and with ease. So first and foremost, marketing systems. So something like a weekly content calendar, which is obviously planned for efficiency. So making sure we have a specific day for filming, a specific day for editing, and a specific day for scheduling. Clear content pillars mapped towards the ICP's problems. A content repurposing workflows. So if we're making content on YouTube, we can go and clip that up and use that for different things specifically. And alongside this, some sort of scheduling tool, for example, Buffer, to remove any inconsistency in your posting specifically. So this ensures content compounds over time instead of feeling random and that we're not actually wasting any time with it specifically. Because I was stuck in the trap, admittedly, and I'm sure potentially some of you guys are stuck in that trap of filming, editing, and posting all in the same day, which unfortunately wastes a lot of time. So secondly, appointment setting system. So we need some sort of a DM tracking sheet so no conversations fall through the pipeline. I'm a victim to this. Potentially you guys have gone and done outbound and missed a lot of leads in your pipeline and it's just not clear and everything just gets scattered. So highly recommend some sort of DM tracking sheet. Secondly, some sort of standardized DM framework that you actually use so you're not improvising conversation to conversation. Thirdly, a pre-qualification form via Calendly or via Typeform to make sure we're pre-qualifying our leads in the DMs, but also before they end up booking. I prefer Calendly over Typeform, if I'm honest. And then finally, a VSL before hopping on the phone, which ultimately filters for our ICP and pre-frames the value before we even get on the phone in the first place. So it's more of a logistical call than actually a selling call in itself. So the third systems are sales systems. So the first thing we need is a structured high ticket call flow so we can actually convert consistently in an authentic way and actually do it so it's seamless. Second, an objection handling framework so you actually know how to handle objections when they do come up. But if you do your job correctly with your structured high ticket call flow, you're able to actually prevent a bunch of objections really coming towards the end. And the only objection should be really logistical. Thirdly, clear offer pillars for your actual transformation so you can sell them seamlessly on call, and it's very, very clear for yourself to deliver, but also for the prospect or your future client to actually comprehend. Fourth, some sort of a post-call follow-up SOP, so that way if people come off the phone and they can't commit on the time, we actually have something in place so that way we're actually following up with them. We make sure that they're actually, nurtured and captured as best as we physically possibly can. So that way, even if they don't end up buying on the phone, that in the future that they end up coming back. But finally, some sort of CRM or pipeline tracking. So this way we can actually keep things organized, like I said, similar to tracking those DMs prior. And finally, fulfillment systems, arguably really, really underrated, but super, super helpful to help you deliver everything, but also more importantly, improve retention, which is super, super important. So first is having some sort of structured onboarding process that allows you to stay hands-off, but also delivers a seamless onboarding process to help people feel like they're actually going through something premium, professional, but make sure we understand from the get-go what they need, what they want, and the 12-week transformation, 6-week transformation, all for the long term in terms of their goals. Some sort of back-end client tracking. So this comes to financial progress and stage tracking. So really, really simple and make sure things are organized in order to be actually able to do that properly. Some sort of weekly check-in framework outside of those potential weekly check-ins that you do, whether it be a call, whether it be via Loom, just to make sure that we're actually following up with them and make sure that they're actually implementing things as best they physically possibly can. Client milestone tracking. So this way you can actually use it for your marketing and your evidence, but also to make it clearer for your client. So that way they can actually see their progress very, very clearly. And finally, some sort of a retention touch point throughout the entirety of the block or however you deliver your coaching. So this way we actually make sure that we're staying up to track with them and they are feeling supported, feeling good, and that they are getting towards their goals essentially. So with those 4 systems, with those skills bear in mind, they're going to help you make sure skills and systems are on point. So that way when we validate the offer, it's actually true data. And then more importantly, we actually act on that clarity that we did so hard at the beginning to build. But the next phase, and probably an exciting one for a lot of people, is actually leverage. And I'm going to explain how without these 3 stages being locked in essentially from the get-go, it's very, very hard to actually, scale and implement leverage within the business as best as you physically possibly can without something breaking. And the last stage out of the 4, and this is the stage where most people rush and actually regret it for the long term, because leverage doesn't fix problems. It just amplifies whatever already exists. If your messaging is weak, leverage is going to do nothing. If your sales are inconsistent, leverage is going to do nothing. And if delivery still heavily relies on you, leverage will just create more chaos in the long term. And this is why leverage only works when your offer is stable, sales are calm and repeatable, and delivery no longer depends solely on yourself to do everything. That's why it's so important to have your ICP dialed in. Make sure you have the right skills and systems from the get-go, and that your offer is validated before you even think about touching an ad or thinking about hiring anyone. Because I've seen too many people go and do this preemptively, prematurely, and it just ends up complicating things and puts people 6 to 12 months behind where they actually should be if they did things the right way in sequence. But if you are at that stage and you do have a repeatable offer, your ICP is actually quite clear and everything has been validated alongside having the right skills, systems, and everything, then this part is actually for you. I'm going to give you proper guidance and KPIs on ads and when to actually dive into paid acquisition, but also alongside this, when to actually hire and when to actually delegate and how to do that properly. So let's go ahead and do it. So when is it actually time to turn on ads, right? Ads aren't a growth strategy. They're just a multiplication tool of whatever is already working at the moment. But they only work when already something converts, like I said. Before you scale them, we need to know our close rate our LTV, which is obviously essentially what our client is worth, your CAC or customer acquisition cost, which ultimately is what you can afford to pay, and if your messaging is already converting organically. Without these 4 things and without these 4 metrics, it's going to be very, very hard to go ahead. You're essentially going into ads and paid acquisition blind. But in the fitness coaching industry, in service-based businesses, or even just online coaching in general, there's 2 main ways that we can actually budget for our ad spend specifically. You can use a mix of both, but you can also do each individually. I'm going to explain each of them now. So the first is through your MRR, which is your monthly recurring revenue. And if we're running ads from our MRR, we should have at least 2 to 3 months of operating runway covered by it, so that we're actually comfortable allocating anywhere from 15 to 30% of that monthly revenue towards marketing. And if spending that money already makes you feel anxious, you're not ready, or we need to break that limiting belief in order to actually put it back in, so we can make 5, 10, 20x ROAS. That'd be amazing. But you can either pull the revenue to actually pull back into marketing from your MRR, or we can fund the ads from our paid in fulls from the package over X amount of time for the coaching service that you're providing. So say, for example, if we're funding ads from PIFs, a good range to actually delegate to marketing from the actual collected revenue upfront for X amount of time is 30 to 40% into acquisition. The remaining 60 to 70% should protect your delivery, operations, and cash buffer in itself. Some people suggest more of an aggressive approach, but aggressive scaling only works when you're actually in a good place emotionally to actually go ahead with it. And also you have a good financial buffer or good financial backing before you. So that way you're willing to lose the money in marketing to actually go and make sure you try and make some back. But essentially, another thing, and it's really, really important, is actually we don't want to confuse cash collected with our true monthly income, because calculating true monthly income just from PIFs actually isn't accurate. So that's just a small tweak that a lot of people don't actually know. But you can obviously grow and scale with ads in either way. Neither are better than each other, but you have to make sure you're doing them correctly. But most importantly, if we don't know our numbers, our ads won't scale growth. You'll just scale whatever's already in the business and any leak or bottleneck that you already have in the first place. So now that we've explained ads and when a good time to actually do that and how to actually delegate that ad budget, whether you're going from an MRR standpoint or from a PIF standpoint or a mix of both potentially, now we actually need to understand when it's time to delegate. And most coaches hire emotionally, either out of stress or ego. But instead of this, honestly, I'm not gonna say I coined this framework. The lovely Matt Gray, really, really amazing guy. If you want to go and have a look at his stuff, it's really, really valuable. We use the eliminate, automate, and then delegate system, right? So firstly, we eliminate what shouldn't exist. We automate that what doesn't require judgment or execution on someone else's behalf, and we delegate only what requires execution. So we ultimately don't hire to feel obviously wow, like I've gone and hired someone, like the business is growing. We hire when your time is actually becoming a bottleneck, your revenue actually supports it, and you've done your due diligence of learning how to do it. But good delegation requires 1, so clear SOPs, standard operating procedures before your hire. 2, a defined role outcome. 3, a trial task before commitment throughout the hiring process. And 4, a decision matrix mixed with skill, culture, and alignment for each specific hire and person coming through to make sure that hiring is seamless, that every hire comes in actually accelerates the business rather than pulls back from the business, and that ultimately, things go smoothly instead of pulling yourself 6 to 12 months backwards when you could have been 6 to 12 months forward just from a few things. Hiring without structure creates more management problems, but hiring with structure creates so much leverage for your business. It's not even funny, and can 2 to 3, even 10x your income if you do it correctly. But I guess with delegation, ads, skills, everything that I've mentioned, all is well good in theory, but the real issue isn't actually delegation or doing any of these things. It's actually judgment, right? It's actually knowing when to hire, what to delegate, what skills you're poor at, what skills you're good at, when to turn on ads, and how to even build your ICP in the first place. This is ultimately where, I guess, oversight really comes into play. And I'll be honest, not many people like hearing this. You can't accurately assess your own business while you're inside it every single day. You're too close to it, and you're not seeing ultimately where your messaging is leaking, where conversations are actually breaking down, and ultimately where these skill gaps are in your sales, marketing, X, Y, and Z, and where your system weaknesses are that actually amplify these poor habits that will bottleneck you at growth and scale. That's why more info won't work, right? Not because you're incapable, but because these blind spots don't announce themselves to you ultimately. You have this external perspective that reveals these blind spots, pressure tests any decisions that you want to go and look through, sharpen your skills, and most importantly, Probably a really underrated one. Keep you grounded when emotions can cloud judgment for obviously high leverage decision making within the business. Really important. This is ultimately the role required if growth is going to be sustainable and going to hold for the long term to help you hit 10 to 30K a month sustainably, predictably, and even potentially further down the line as well. Because when someone helps you see these things clearly, your clarity sharpens, your validation tightens, and skills improve faster than you could have ever imagined. Systems are also built correctly within the right stage, in the right sequence, so growth stops feeling fragile and ultimately it compounds for the long term. And to be honest, I've seen this more than once. The first time I genuinely saw this was with a close friend, George. And he was an online fitness coach, really good mate. And at the time, he was really struggling in general. He was stuck at around 15 clients at the time. He had been burnt by a previous mentor, and he was essentially tethering on the line of burnout. And at the time, I didn't even do what I wanted to do at the moment. Like, it was really unintentional, and I think I've explained that already. But pretty much, I didn't have an offer for him, I didn't charge him, and genuinely, we just jumped on a few calls, and I told him that I would just teach him everything that I knew up to this point. We fixed and clarified one, who he was actually building everything for in the first place. Two, we fixed his skills, we fixed his systems in order to actually help him validate his offer properly. And literally without adding massive amounts of leverage, he went from 4K a month to 20K a month in 6 months. Absolutely ridiculous. And he's hit it multiple times since then. And I started noticing something as well. This same pattern actually was showing up at higher levels as well. So another coach and another good friend, Aiden, came through and essentially was doing quite well already, to be honest. He was doing 16K a month and he was in a pretty good spot. Like he literally told me his business is actually completely fine. But he ultimately wanted to grow and scale past that naturally. And he ultimately didn't know how to do that with the way he was doing things at the time. And his effort clearly wasn't the problem. He clearly got to 16K a month through hard work and through a good amount of effort. But the biggest thing was he wasn't clear on who he was actually serving for in the first place. His skills overall with his marketing, with his sales, and even with his appointment setting weren't all up to scratch as they could have been. And he couldn't really explain prior what were actually driving the results for him. And once all these things became clear, once his skills improved, and once he ultimately stopped guessing through everything, he actually scaled from 16K a month and hit his first $26,000 a month in less than 90 days. Like absolutely ridiculous, crazy stuff. And he's absolutely smashing it as well. We're now on the stage where we're going to start adding leverage. So actually starting to buy back his time and also starting to obviously run paid acquisition. So exciting times for sure. And I've also seen this happen for George and Nick, some very close friends of mine now. But essentially this helped George and Nick go from less than 3K a month to 20K a month in less than 90 days as well, which is absolutely ridiculous, by the way. It's like literally crazy. They weren't clear on who they were serving from the get-go. And alongside the lack of sales, appointment setting, and marketing skills overall, they struggled to really grow. And it was only until they got these things on point, it was actually started to grow, scale, and ultimately hit these numbers repeatedly without guesswork, and they were more predictable. We're now going back and finally buying back their time with some leverage through strategic hires so they can focus on what matters most, but improve fulfillment and delivery for their clients as well. Absolutely amazing. I'm so proud of these boys. It's literally ridiculous. But the big thing is between these three boys, wasn't anything crazy. Like it literally wasn't. Like it wasn't any secret hack. It wasn't any tactic. It was, they ultimately all got results because when they got clear on who they were serving, why they were doing it, and how they could actually help people, when we validated everything through their skills being sharpened, before we implemented systems and leverage to help them grow and scale past this, everything stopped feeling chaotic. Growth became structured and everything stopped feeling like guesswork. But the truth is that most people see these numbers and assume they think it is these taxes, these secret hacks, or anything that's really going to 10x their growth. But it's really not. It's really at its core about alignment. And I care a lot about that more than most people realize. And I'm going to go and explain that right now. If you've watched this far, then you'll probably realize that everything I'm doing now isn't just about scaling coaching businesses and making more money. It's ultimately about building something that doesn't collapse under pressure, but ultimately, more importantly, something that actually feels aligned to you, that you can actually serve people with for the long term. And these things, like I emphasized, matter to me for a reason. My dad was a founder himself. He built multiple tech startups, he worked long hours, and he was constantly driven to provide for our family as best as he physically possibly could. He worked hard because he wanted to give us everything, but the actual cost of this was his health, his energy, and eventually essentially our family. Money was one of the biggest sources of tension at home. And when things finally fell apart, I promised myself I'd never let that happen again. I wanted to build something stable, something that I could take care of everyone that I loved, so nobody would ever have to feel that kind of pressure that I experienced growing up. And that still stands to this very day. That's actually what pushed me into business in the first place. But the truth of this was that same hunger for security became the reason I almost lost myself as well. When I started my coaching business, I was obsessed about making it work because of everything I just explained. I invested in 2 different mentors, chasing every strategy, every guarantee, every promise. And while they were both good people, none of it really clicked. I had all the funnels, all the scripts, all the content cadences, you name it. I literally had everything, but I still didn't know who I was actually building everything for in the first place. Every post felt forced. Every sales call I took felt random. And despite working harder than ever, nothing felt aligned to who I really was. And I'll be honest, I invested thousands and thousands that I didn't really have. At times, I was stressed, embarrassed, even questioning if I was cut out for all of this. Because when you keep giving it your all and it's not moving the needle forward, it really starts to mess with your confidence. Then came what I thought would be my big break. I posted a video that went completely viral, accumulating 12.5 million views, 100,000 likes, and a lot of hate. And in total, across that same format over a few videos, it ended up totaling over 30 million views. And for a moment, I genuinely thought I'd made it. Essentially, that video didn't reflect who I really was. It went viral for the wrong reasons, and essentially almost overnight, my business completely tanked. My leads dried up, people had a perception of me that wasn't actually true, and I remember sitting there thinking, how did I even end up here in the first place? That was the day I learned one of the most important things I've ever learned in business. If your purpose isn't genuine or rooted in clarity, in who you are, and who you serve, then every bit of growth, any bit of revenue that comes with it will all come with a cost. You can go viral, but if it's not aligned with who you are, it means nothing. You can sell, but if it's not from a place of genuine conviction or service, then you won't grow. So I stopped chasing views, likes, comments, engagement in itself, and I had to start asking myself the deeper questions that are necessary in order to grow. Who am I actually here to serve? What kind of business do I actually want to build? And how do I make sure it lasts for the long term? So that way I can make as big of an impact on people as I physically possibly can. And that's essentially when everything changed. My content started connecting, my offer started converting, but more importantly, it finally felt true to who I was. Because I realized clarity isn't just a concept, it was personal. And I hadn't just been unclear in business, I had been unclear in who and what I was building everything for in the first place. And probably even deeper, who I was actually becoming. And for a long time, I tied my identity to outcomes, to the 10k a month, to the 20k a month, to the 30k a month, to whether things were working. And ultimately, when things weren't, everything in my life felt unstable. And this is ultimately where my faith entered the picture. Not as an idea, but essentially to help me re-anchor everything in my life. It changed how I lead, how I work, and most importantly, how I define success. I stopped building everything to prove my worth to the world and started building from a genuine place of integrity, responsibility, and service. Obviously, I'm not perfect, but I genuinely try and do my best to embody this everywhere. And throughout all this, and this matters a lot more than people realize, is that I met the woman who is now my partner and is soon to be my future wife. When she came into my life, there was absolutely zero proof of concept. Like there was literally nothing. There was no revenue, there was no certainty at all that things would work. But what there actually was pressure. Pressure to grow up, pressure to become a dependable man, and pressure to live in alignment to the man I said I wanted to be. She hasn't stayed with me because of what I had. She ultimately stayed with me because she could see who I was becoming in her eyes, even when I didn't see it. She obviously had standards, stability mattered, integrity mattered, and direction mattered. But underneath it all was something very rare. She believed in my character before my actions reflected it. And that ultimately changed everything. Because for the first time in my life, I wasn't building anything out of fear anymore. I was moving out of responsibility. Responsibility to God, responsibility to her, and finally, the responsibility to the life that I said I wanted to build for her, but also my future family. And this belief didn't make me complacent at all, I'll tell you that. It ultimately made me more accountable. And it taught me something that I now carry into my work every single day. Clarity isn't just a tactic to make more money. It's knowing what you believe, who you're called to serve, how you're meant to impact them, and why you're building everything in the first place. And for me, that clarity is rooted in my faith. Building without values, without direction, without a backbone beyond ego or income is how businesses grow fast, but collapse just as quickly. I don't build for attention. I don't build for vanity. I build to serve, to honor what I've been blessed with, and something that honors God alongside genuinely helping people. This foundation is what everything else sits on. If this all resonates with you, it's probably because you're not looking for more tactics. You're trying to build something that grows without guessing, sells without pressure, and doesn't feel like it could break at the very next decision. Everything I just explained, the 4 sequence, the oversight, essentially all the structure around this is what I implement inside my own mentorship. It's called the Revive and Thrive Operator Advisory, and it's specifically built for coaches who already have momentum, but want to grow their businesses that's sustainable, predictable, and that actually holds for the long term. If you want to talk through where your business feels fragile and what would actually need to change in order for your business to feel stable, you're welcome to message me on Instagram at any time. There's no pressure either way. I hope you found value. I'm rooting for you and I'm keen to see how you progress.